Cool, cool. Big shoes to fill after that one. I'm not quite as funny, I'm just a bit more funny looking. So, yeah, obviously from the title, this is a presentation on RouterOS scripting. I hope to be able to show those of you who haven't used RouterOS scripting before a bit about what it's capable of, and hopefully those of you that have will go away having learned a bit more about what its uses are, some good use cases, and a few examples I've included in here. So as you've probably guessed from my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm from... Oi, oi, oi. I'm from that little prison island, otherwise known as Australia. And I'm based in Brisbane, Queensland. So I've been around the MikroTik forums and using MikroTik for a number of years now, since 2005. And if you check on the list there's a number of groups that I participate in and just trying to help out the MikroTik community. As of last year, I'm actually working with a group called Bright Wi-Fi, and I'll get the advertising out of the way now. These guys have obviously paid for my trip here, and this is what I'm excited about. So hopefully in my explanations of scripting and everything here, you'll understand a bit more about why scripting is so important to me and to Bright Wi-Fi. So a bit about what we do. Bright Wi-Fi over the past couple of years have developed a software that allows you to provision MikroTik devices, set up your locations, bill your customers in both a hotspot and PPPoE models. So there's a lot of hotspot providers out there that have cloud-hosted solutions. Point your radius and point your login page to our remote server. We've built a system that does every step along the way as well. So taking a MikroTik out of its box in its default state, plugging it into a deployment tool and having it set up for you, which when you're rolling out 200 plus devices in a new MDU, saves a lot of time in the long run. So yeah, a bit more about it. It does the whole AAA thing, does your analytics, does your deployment, and it allows you to manage those devices, give your support team limited access to view information about users that are online, bypass users, kick users off, and gives your network administration team direct access via Winbox and things like that. So that's that bit finished. So RouterOS scripting. Hands up who here has actually written a RouterOS script before? Okay, so actually quite a good number of you. RouterOS scripting is the on-router scripting that allows you to configure devices, change existing configurations, pull details from the router, and basically do things that aren't included in RouterOS itself. You can run scripts remotely, you can run scripts on a scheduler entry, there's no external server or anything required, and you can utilize just the RouterOS system to perform all these tasks without needing anything external. So that's both reoccurring and time-sensitive events that you've got scheduled or triggered by different actions. So it has access to all of the features you would normally have if you're connecting to a device using the terminal. You can use the tools that you have in there to fetch files. You can use that to import configurations, and you have limited access to actually read and create files on the router itself. Currently, the limitations are basically a file of 4,096 characters long, because that's the longest sort of variable limit you have. And I'll go into that a bit more later in one of the examples, why it's useful to be able to download files and why it's important that you be able to read them. So the other one is that you can have, as of some of the newer versions, you can have function declarations as well. You can create a repeatable subroutine that you can then call in other scripts and basically save time if you're building a lot of scripts on a MikroTik device. It's a really powerful tool to have. So there's 3 main avenues in which a scripting command is run. I touched on some of them already. You can either have a direct trigger. So if you're logged into a MikroTik and you've created a script already, you can run that script from there. System script run my script name here. You could have a event-based trigger. So there's a lot of functions in RouterOS that have an on-event script option. The hotspot profile has one, the user profile. So on login, on logout, you can run a script, and it actually allows you to grab information about the user that logged in and logged out. There's ones in the DHCP options. There's ones in even things like VRRP. What exactly do you want to do when the router fails over? And that's basically limited by your imagination. If you just want it to turn an interface on or turn an interface off, that's fine. Alternatively, you could have it send an email out. If you've got a 3G or a 4G device connected and you've got the SMS tool enabled, you could send an alert to your NOC team and tell them that something's wrong. The last one is the time-based trigger, which uses scheduler entries. So you create a scheduler entry with a defined time that you want to run the script, and then a repeat time. So you basically say, on startup, I want to run this script, and then I want to run it every 6 hours after that, just to send a backup of my device or report on how many users are connected or something like that. So, who is using it? Why would you want to use it? Basically, scripting fills a gap in doing fancy configurations and creating information that you wouldn't otherwise be able to pull directly from a MikroTik. Yes, you can use things like SNMP. Yes, you can log in via Winbox. But if you want to collect a bunch of information and export that in some format, or if you wanted to be able to say, this is a bad customer of mine. He always goes over his quota every month, and he doesn't pay me on time. I want to generate a script that, if he goes over 500 gig in his first day of usage, we automatically shape him back. So you could do something like that. And you could then apply that to all of your customers and have a script actually run through looking at different connections for different metrics. Extending existing functionality to support new features. There's an example coming up where the trial user on a hotspot can normally only limit a user by time or by a rate limit. There's no way to actually limit by data at the moment, but using scripting, you can keep track of all the active users on a hotspot, look for trial users, and actually create an on-router user and kick them out when they reach a certain data limit. So that functionality doesn't exist on RouterOS itself, but using an automated script, you can build that in. I already mentioned the failover options with VRRP. Some other people have router setups where they might have 1 or 2 upstream providers, but maybe they've got a backup 4G or like a cellular connection. You can decide when you want something to fail over. If you've got a couple of remote servers or something you're pinging, rather than using something like NetWatch, which will mark it as down after the first ping is lost, you could say, let's check for 5 or 10 lost pings, or even just a big increase in latency. Send out an email to that announcing that there's a problem there, and then fail over to a backup route. Backup solutions is something I see a lot of people doing, scheduling an email to actually include your backup.rsc or your .backup file, and sending that to a remote server, either via email or using the fetch tool to actually upload it via FTP as well. The last one that's really cool is you can actually use regular expressions in your scripts as well. So if you want to search for specific entries, maybe you've got comments in a couple of your rules that say, these are custom firewall rules for this customer, and I only want them to be enabled at certain times. You could call out to the router and run a script to disable or enable those, or you could just put it on a scheduler. So who's using it? For those of you who, when you first plug in a MikroTik device, you'll see a little message that comes up. This has got a default configuration. Do you want to remove it? If you actually look at the show script command, you'll see the MikroTik configuration that's deployed is actually using a script there. It looks for a certain number of interfaces, it looks for them by name, by default name, and when you click that reverse button, there's another script there that actually goes through and clears the router back out. It doesn't require rebooting the router to clear it. They have every little bit of that in the script. The MikroTik wiki, there's at least 100 scripts on that scripts page itself, and if you search through, there's probably 100 more that are hiding around the place, people have generated over the years and not added onto that page. The MikroTik forums, there's always people posting weird and wonderful configurations there. For those of you who remember TikTube, there used to be a video on there of someone setting up like a little router board choir, and they had like 4 or 5 routers all running at once playing music, and they were trying to sync them up using a script and get that all running. So, and yeah, lastly, there's thousands and thousands of scripts just accessible via Google. If you ever looking for some custom configuration, the first thing I'll normally do is do a quick search for it and see if anyone's done something similar that I can reuse or modify to suit my needs. And then some sources. My good friends, Tom, who just gave his presentation, has a couple on his site, and Greg's always doing something weird, wacky, and wonderful on his. And MikroTik-routeros.com, which I've run for a couple of years with the assistance of a few others. There's hundreds on there that probably some of you have already seen. Okay, so given most of you have done a little bit of scripting in the past, I'll gloss over some of these a little bit. I was originally going to make this more of a basic thing, but I had a lot of requests throughout yesterday and today saying, can we talk about some of the more advanced stuff? So basically, defining variables is one of the most important things as part of scripting. You want to be able to store values and recover them and use them in other parts of your script. There's 2 types, local and global variables. Local variables stay within the script that they're created in, where global variables can pass from one to another. If you're pasting commands in terminal, each line is actually considered a local scope. So if you've got a local variable in there, it won't continue on to the next line. Whereas if you're using a global variable, or if you're testing, I'd recommend switching to global variables. That way, once you finish running your script, you can see what the variables have actually collected, what information's in there, and perhaps why your script's erroring or not doing what's expected. Setting is just the updating the variable, so assigning a new value to an existing variable, and those values are strings, numbers. You can have an array assigned to a variable. You can do a whole bunch of things there and just update each one. So probably one of the most useful commands when you are writing a script is using the put command to actually return what the variables are set to or what your commands are trying to do at that time. So that put command actually shoves your output there to terminal. The other one is the log command. So if you're running scripts on a scheduler, I would typically add in log entries along the way. So if for some reason the script fails, or even if it's just completing and you want to leave a note there showing that it's been run, you can log as an informational event, a warning, or an error. And if you've got your MikroTik logging set up to export somewhere else, maybe the warnings or the errors you're sending off to a syslog server, and you'll get notifications about those events. So getting into the good stuff, the variable substitution is basically putting those variables that you've declared anywhere else in the script. And once you come down to, or once you start looking at interfaces, you're trying to pick things out of there. You've got an if command, an if do else sort of statement, which anyone familiar with programming would have seen in other programming languages. There's a couple of fancy bits and pieces here that I'll try and explain, but a lot of these you'll play around with from time to time and you'll see exactly how they work when you're on the router. The command line substitution is basically taking a block of terminal code or a command and executing that and then returning the result in that place. So, for example, the one that I've got here, IP hotspot active print count only. So if I'm trying to collect a value or something, you could put a put command in front of that, or you could put a set command and use that to set a variable name. Set a variable value. If you've got another command where you want to perhaps print out a list of interfaces that match a certain search term, do the same thing, and it will return that as part of your script. The grouping operator, useful for math and concatenation, so adding X and Y variables together. You would actually put a dot between variables to combine them, and you can put sections of commented text in there as well. So if I'm wanting to build up some sort of email that says, this is the interfaces that are online at the moment, this is the CPU of the router, this is the RAM utilization, I can use the concatenation to actually combine all those little bits and pieces together into one variable and then send that as part of my email. And comments, which are very useful for anyone else who's trying to look at your script later on, or if, like me, you've come back to a script that's like 8 years old and you're like, what the hell was I doing here? So, the advanced functions. Using the resolve command will give you an IP address for a DNS lookup. You have to be careful using this one though, because if you're running a script with a resolve command inside of it and the lookup fails, it will halt the script there. You can get around that by actually inserting the resolve command inside a do block and then giving it an on-error attribute. I'll go through, there's one of those a bit further on and I'll touch on it then. But basically it means that you can do error handling within your script and log something to the MikroTik to show that it failed and why it failed, rather than just having the script stop every time. Picking is very useful if you are trying to get a certain section of a variable. So if you're trying to get the time, like the hour of the day or something, or you're trying to export a speed for an interface and you just want one part or the other, you can actually use it to say where you want to start and stop. One other use for it is if you're downloading a text file or something that has multiple lines, you can run through and say, okay, I want to pick the length of this entire file that I've imported, and then I want to pick each individual line and read through those. And I'll show an address list import later that uses that exact function. The find command, so that's for finding the position. Once again, if you've got an interface or something that has the TX and RX rates and it's got the slash in the middle, you could use the find command to say, okay, from position 0 to the slash is 4, therefore I want to pick that first bit, that's my TX rate, and +1 on that to the end of the string or the length of the string, that's my RX rate. Then there's the for loops, so for each, and the do and while commands are basically examples of loops that you can create within RouterOS. So a perfect example would be for each Ethernet interface that this device has, I want to print out if it's up or down at the moment. And I want to put that into a variable, or I just want to action, like do something based on that action. Same with for each. So the for one, initially you might want to do just a set number of loops. For each, you can actually do a find, a search command to find how many rules there are or how many IP addresses there are and loop through for every one of those. Do and while, similar to a for loop, but you can wait on a certain result. So I use one of these for importing SSL certificates onto a MikroTik. Sometimes it takes a little longer, and I've got other scripts that are waiting on it to complete. So I'll basically tell it to pause at that point, wait for the certificate import to complete and confirm it can see those there, then continue on to set up a hotspot. The arrays I touched on, they're just a different type of variable, so you can store an array of values in there and then use a command to either set a specific value within the array or pull a value out. So Lorenzo was working earlier on a little wireless script that generated a bunch of virtual APs, and we used an array there to pick a bunch of names and hand it out to each interface. So you can define those, or you can pull them from somewhere else and build an array of values. The regular expressions, hands up here who's actually used regular expressions before? Okay, a bit less than those that have done scripting, but if you haven't, regular expressions are really useful, and I think everyone should at least learn the basics for being able to sort through users or devices and use a custom regular expression is really helpful. Maybe you want to be able to search for certain DNS entries that are appearing or something and filter those, or maybe you're wanting to search for certain connections that are appearing. You can use a regular expression to do custom filtering and searching. A good example of that is I quite often use a script that updates IP addresses that MikroTik doesn't support DNS-based entries for. So a radius server, for example, I might have 3 or 4 static radius servers and 5 or 6 dynamic ones. In the dynamic ones, I'll put a little flag up in the comments that says this is an auto update entry, and I'll have a regular expression that looks for that auto update flag in the comment. And if it sees that, it knows to look for a DNS name to update the radius server with periodically. The last one, which is a very big one to go into, is you can actually define functions within RouterOS as well and call those within other scripts. So, for example, if you had a script that would tell you, give me a second. For example, if you had a script that would tell you when the last hotspot user logged in or something like that, and you wanted to call it from a couple of places to make sure the router's health was okay, you could add that inside of an existing script you'd created, have the results returned, and continue to use that in the first script. So recommendations when starting out. There's a few RouterOS syntax highlighting packages that are out there. I personally use Notepad++. I believe there's another one for Sublime Text Editor. They make it really easy to see when you've missed a bracket or when you've missed your closing quotes, and basically make your life a lot easier, because pasting it into RouterOS doesn't show you any of that. You've just got a blob of text there. Unless you're exporting it in terminal, then it does show some of it, but it's not really a good place for editing your scripts. As I mentioned earlier, using put to debug things is super helpful, because you can see where the variables are at, maybe why they haven't been set, or if they've been set incorrectly, and then you're trying to pass an incorrect variable. When you're running through finding errors, commenting out sections or enclosing them in a do bracket allows you to catch an error there. However, you need to be aware of how global and local variables work. If you're defining global variable at the top of a script, it will be available to that script and any other script on the router that wants to look it up. If you define a global variable within a scope, so the curly brackets define a scope, it will not pass back into the rest of the script. So if at the very top of the script I've got a do bracket and I'm setting global test, and I try and reference it further down outside of that bracket, it's not going to work for me there. Same goes with the local variables. Local variables will only ever be available within their local scope. So if you're defining them there, they're not going to pass back either. But they will, if defined at the top of the script or anywhere within the script that's not inside a scope, they'll be available to the rest of that script, but none others. So, now the fun stuff, practical uses. There's a lot of code tried to fit into these ones, so you may or may not be able to read all of it, but I'll have these slides up later on, and you can all check it out and send over any questions you have. I just wanted to go through a few examples that I've used from time to time to give everyone an understanding of how these items all fit together and how you would use them. So this is a little router health script that I modified a number of years ago. Basically what it does is it takes the CPU usage, the voltage of the device, the temperature of the device, as well as the number of active hotspot and PPPoE users, and clumps them all into one variable, and then actually appends them to or adds them as the system note. So whenever you open terminal, it's going to have a little bit at the bottom there that says, this is your uptime of the router, this is your CPU utilization, this is the voltage and temperature. And you'll see here, I've actually got, in the middle of this section, it's looking for a voltage and temperature readout, which doesn't exist on the x86 systems. So what I've done, I've first of all gone to system resources, and I've shortened those down because I can do that so long as it's a unique value. So I've gone system resource get architecture type, and I've picked the first three letters of that to say, is it x86? If it's x86, I'm going to just set voltage and temperature to NA. Otherwise, I'm going to try and pull them from the device. So all routable devices should give me some sort of response on that. Not all of them support voltage and temperature monitoring, but the x86 ones will actually return an error if you try and poll them for that information. So that allows it to run on any device. You could also use a regex in that case and look for x86 within the architecture type. This was just an easier one to do in this place, and a good example to show. The other one you'll see is that there is in the lower lines where I've got the hotspot and PPPoE active counters, I'm actually searching for any active hotspot users. So it's going to put that out to me as an array, and I'm then using the length command to take the value, the length of that array. So it's not the length of all the individual bits and pieces inside, but the number of items in the array. So in this case, if there's 10 users online, the array is going to spit out 10 items there, and the length command is going to tell me that's how many there is. So I've then appended that to, or each time I've set the terminal command, I've appended the next value to it, and then right at the end, I've updated the system note to reflect that. So this sort of thing you set on a scheduler entry, maybe to run every 5 minutes or so. So if anyone logs into the router, they're prompted with that little message at the top that says, this is how the router's going. This one is a bit more in depth. But basically what it is doing is downloading a text file from the internet and importing that as an address list. This is useful in cases where maybe you're trying to download a spammer's block list or something. Maybe you've got a list of IP addresses that are for Netflix and you want to give those priority or deprioritize them, and someone maintains that sort of list. You can download and import that into your MikroTik device. So what it's doing at the very start here, it's fetching the file that we want to look at, and it's actually collecting that inside an error bracket. So if for some reason the fetch fails, it will set the fetch success value as false, and just down below that we check and say, did it fail, did it succeed or did it fail? If it succeeded, then we can continue on at that point. You'll see there, I'm doing a very quick way of removing all of the address list entries. I've actually gone through and said the standard MikroTik command that you might type in to normally remove a single entry, IP firewall address list remove, and then I've put in the command block there find list equals IP list. So that's going to actually give us every address list entry that is in that list. It'd be similar to writing remove 0, 1, 2, or each of the numbers for that address list that you're trying to clear. The next thing we're doing is setting a content variable with the contents of the text file that we've downloaded. And now we get to the problem that I'd mentioned before. If you are downloading a large file, you're limited to 4,096 characters within a MikroTik variable. So if your files are a lot larger than that, you're probably going to have to find some way outside of a MikroTik to break them up, unless MikroTik looks to reintroduce the LUA support. It was around for a very few versions, they were testing it, but at the moment it's still just that 4,096 character limit. So you can see in the set section, we're taking that contents of the file that we've just copied, and we're looking for line n. So /n command for the new line, we're saying pick between the start of that line and the last /n. So each time we want to pick a new line, we look for that and set that as the variable to import. Then further down, we're filtering out any comments. So if a line starts with a hash, we say, don't try and import this. It's going to be a comment or something on the file. After we've sorted out all those, then we're actually importing each entry that we've collected as a new IP address list entry. So you can see once again, to fit it in, I've actually shortened the command down to IP fire instead, because there's only one match for that, so RouterOS will intelligently complete that. And then right down at the bottom, it's using the do while loop. It's waiting for this to process all the way through to the end of the file. Until it gets to the end of the file, it'll keep loading those entries. So right down the bottom, saying if the fetch success was false, we'll mark it as false and create a log entry for that. Is there any questions about any of these two so far? No? All good? Okay, we'll continue on. This is another interesting use case. So updating a time server. At the moment, once you've set a time server in MikroTik, it converts the DNS name to an IP address. And maybe you're pointing to the pool.ntp.org time server for your local region. You want it to just check and grab an updated server to make sure it's getting an active one. I've actually put down both sections of this script. So the first one is the script itself, and the second half is how you would paste this into terminal to get a scheduler entry running the script every day. So you can see there it's actually using the resolve command to say what, in this case, what's time.windows.com resolve to. If for some reason it fails, it's going to go, yep, okay, that failed, and log a warning to the MikroTik. So if you've got, once again, if you've got your syslogs sending those off, you're going to get an error saying this router wasn't able to fetch a new time server, so it's not going to try and update the existing one, it's just going to stay there. Okay, the last practical example. As I mentioned, there is currently no data limit on the hotspot trial users. So if you're creating a very simple hotspot on a MikroTik, you're not using User Manager, and you want to put a data limit on the usage of your trial users, this is a script you would schedule to run, say, every minute, every 2 minutes, and it actually checks. It goes through all of the active users and says, what's their download amount at the moment? What's their download count? If it finds a user that has exceeded the limit, in this case I've set it at 50 meg, it actually creates, it deletes the trial user that MikroTik sets up, creates a static, like a local hotspot user entry that is limited to 50 meg, and then kicks off the active session. This causes the user that's listed there to accumulate the 50 megabytes of data, and when the user tries to sign back in, it's going to say to them, no, you've already used your quota for today. So with that, you then need a scheduler entry to come back every 24 hours or maybe every 2 days, 3 days, and clear out those entries so that people are going to be able to use again. So troubleshooting scripts. I touched on this a little earlier. You'll get a lot of errors if you're just trying to run resolutions or run commands against interfaces that don't exist. be it through inadvertently putting down the wrong name or collecting the wrong value for that interface. That'll actually cause the script to halt at that point. If you're running it from terminal, it'll actually give you a message that says the script terminated on this line and at this point. And generally it's around there you'll see you've missed a bracket, or you've missed a comment, a close quotes mark, or you've just got the variable wrong. So you can use the do and on error brackets to handle some of those and give you more information about what actually went wrong. However, when you're first creating your script and debugging, I'd highly recommend using the global variable declarations, as it means you can go back into system script and environment, and it will show you a report of what all the variable values are at this point. The last one is you can quite easily put a comment in front of things you're not sure if they're working or not. Run through the script and see if it completes successfully, then you know where your errors are. So I wanted to take a couple of questions out to the room now and just see, firstly, if anyone's got any examples of things they've solved with scripts in the past, or any examples of things they'd like to solve. And I want to see if we can have a back and forth here and just nut out how you would actually solve that using onboard router OS scripting. Even if it's something you're working on or something you want to share with other people. And if you ask a question, you get a delicious Australian biscuit called a Tim Tam.
Not really a question, Andrew, but you have an awesome script that you and Greg have kind of conspired on maybe for traffic shaping. So that would be a very, very big benefit to everybody in this room if you haven't checked it out. You guys have, done a lot of traffic shaping work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a biscuit.
Okay.
Just a comment. I've written a script. We actually use a PHP internal provisioning process page for a lot of our router types, and you can select the MikroTik router, and then it goes and launches a page, and the provisioners are remote into another country, and it accesses an access server, telnets into the MikroTik, and all they have to fill out is the customer name, the IP address that they've been assigned on the WAN. They can pick whether it's an Ethernet or an added interface, and then it basically then dumps the whole config out, emails us in the network engineering group the whole config, so we know if there's like an MPLS that we have to enable somewhere, and cool. Then it backs up the whole thing and puts it in a file server for us. So that's really, really, really handy tools.
Yeah, so it's a perfect example, like those sort of things that you normally would have to go out and log into the MikroTik and have a look around for. You can automate those sort of procedures so that you get alerts when certain events happen, and not just events that you might normally find by looking at the router through SNMP or other services like that.
So one thing I've found is whenever I'm writing scripts, I'm terrible about trying to put it all in at once, and it's completely broken. So something I've found is put a little bit in, test, a little bit in, test, and just keep going. I'm terrible about that. But you were asking about how would you approach something to solve, and I have a question for you, and that would be if you wanted to track multiple physical interfaces, whether they were up or down, and then have a script act upon that, say for VRRP. I've done this in the past, but how would you approach it?
So in that sort of case, I would probably go straight to an array. I'd jump into something like a for each, let's say you want to track Ethernet interfaces, so you go for each interface Ethernet find, and it would loop through all the Ethernet type interfaces. You could actually filter it down further and say you wanted to match only interfaces with the word either in the title there. So if you've changed certain things away, maybe even put a comment if you want to only action it on a smaller subset. But once you've stored those in an array, you could say either one has the value yes or no, or up or down, whether it's connected or not. Once you've got that array, you can actually then loop through that and say, for each item in this, if an interface is up, do this. If an interface is down, do this. Or further elaborate and say, if an interface is up and we can't reach something, disable this one. If an interface is down and we can't reach something, enable that one. And you could schedule that sort of entry, or you could use a scheduler to watch for changes on the interfaces and actually run it at that point. So, yeah.
So we use scripts for security. We actually have several routers in our network, and we use them as honeypots. So we leave port 22 open and telnet open for SSH.
Yep.
And we have a script that sits there and monitors how many connections it gets per minute to the telnet or SSH port, and you get added to an address list, and we drop all your traffic in the firewall, and then we take and share these lists among routers in our network, so we protect all of our traffic. We also have a script that downloads the SORB's known blacklist and automatically add those to a list which we drop in the firewall too.
Yeah, that's a really good example actually. There's a number of blacklists out there. The SORB's one. There's a few others like IP address ranges that shouldn't be advertised to the internet or shouldn't ever be routed to. And the problem I see sometimes is that ISPs will have an older list that they've set statically where there's a certain range. The 1.0.0.0/8 space is a perfect example. It was only advertised in the last couple of years and ISPs started to use it. But there are a number of ISPs out there who had static blacklists that were blocking that sort of thing. Scripting would be a perfect example of how you could resolve that issue. Once you've set up a script on your router to update those address lists, you never have to do anything. If a new address list is published, your old entries are going to be cleared and re-added, and it solves that problem. You don't have to check back on those sort of things, and your customers will be happier for it. So.
I'm using a situation where I have a lot of installers, I guess installers like say measurement techs, because we're an oil and gas company, that aren't really router specialists.
Yep.
So I have like a generic kind of a diagnostics configuration that will go and check their interface errors, are we on the right version of software, all of that. And they just are able to go in and drop this, and it formats and outputs the results for them in a nice, easy to read. Is this up to snuff, or do you need to work on it kind of a solution? So
Yeah, no, that's good. So router health and monitoring things that S&MP is necessarily not going to show you is a perfect use.
So one of the things I was thinking of too was for a script for OSPF. Like let's say if we have two backcalls for redundancy, that if one of them is running at 100 megs interface and some reason it switches to 10 meg, and we have another path that can do 100 megs, it can just switch to that path automatically. Just adjust the cost for it.
So you're basically extending the OSPF functionality to suit your requirements. Is that right?
Yeah, just make adjustment of the cost based on the physical interface.
Excellent.
So
Cool examples. Is there anyone else? If not, we can move
There
on.
are.
We have two up here.
Okay, yep, two up there. I see them. Hiding up the back.
So, kudos on your presentation. You've got a great skill, like teaching. It's great. Kudos to you. Is there any way, or have you found, like the need to use an external tool, like to process external scripts? Have you found the need to do that, or if you will find it, what would it be your best guess to do it? Would like calling an external tool, processing on another server or something, to like use PHP, Python, or whatever other scripting language? What would be your best guess to make MikroTik like process or have processed external, the scripts processed externally and then bring the response back? Thank you.
I've actually seen, there's a couple of recent products I've seen. There's a guy who's making a software called MikroTik Helper. I'll put a link to it up in the slides when I put them online. But basically he's built this system that using a single fetch command, he installs the OpenVPN connection on your router, downloads certificates and everything, and connects it back up to a cloud monitoring service that just looks at it and says, what are your interfaces doing? What's the router health like? And you can make little changes from there as well. So that's one example. In Bright Wi-Fi, we're actually doing a lot of similar things to manage our routers, because there are requirements beyond what RouterOS can handle. As I've mentioned, there's that 4,096 character limit. So if I want to import some sort of big address list, then yes, you can use the API for some of those commands. Sometimes, though, you'll want to automate things from the router itself, so have it call out to pages. One really good use case is we've actually been toying with the idea of setting a default recovery config on routers so that in the event that someone resets a router or it gets into a state that it can't communicate with anyone anymore, you can reset it to a default config, which actually reaches back out to a server and says, this is me, this is my license ID. We would have that recorded somewhere and then hand out a configuration to it. So if it's just pinging back to the server every now and again, we would see a message saying, yep, this device has got no configuration right now. What do you want to do? And from the server side, you can then return in the next poll an actual section of configuration to get that device back online again. So that sort of thing could end up being entirely automated. You could say, here is all my device IDs that I know about. If one of these gets reset for any reason, and it calls back, it has the correct username and password and everything, we'll hand it out a config to update itself. So that's a great use.
Okay, last question.
This is a fairly newbie question. We have some scripts that do a lot of fetches, and occasionally they get stuck. And how do you find out what's stuck and clear them out?
I missed the last bit of that. Sorry, how do you find out
which scripts are stuck and how do you clear them out?
Okay, so if you had a couple of scripts running that were getting stuck in the middle of the script, if it was actually the fetch that was failing, you could use that do loop to issue a command on error. However, you could also set up some sort of monitoring, like scheduler entry, that would check your list of scripts that were running. So if you look under system scripts, it actually shows each one that's being run at the moment and who initiated it. So you could have like a health monitor on the router that said, check every minute and see what scripts are currently running. If this one has been running for more than 10 minutes, terminate it and actually send an email with the script name letting you know that there was a problem there. So that'd be a good way to catch those sort of errors and have something monitoring on the router so it didn't just keep trying to run those and then stack up to 100% utilization.
Thank you very much.